Hey all, and welcome to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and discuss some of humanity's most controversial and intriguing concepts through the lens of skepticism. We have with us today Richard Gilliver from Skeptic Takeout, Laura McGee from Unapologetically Me, and Richard Gill from the Yorkshire Atheist. Today, we are going to be discussing pseudoscience. So, grab your English tea, or in my case, my sleepy time sinus soothing tea, and join us as we chit chat about how to kind of, sort of, but not really do science. This is episode 17, Pseudo-Science.
This is indeed episode 17, Pseudo-Science, and it's so funny because I've literally just gone on Facebook a few hours ago and asked for suggestions on our wonderful Facebook group from people what kind of episodes they'd like to see, and somebody actually wrote pseudoscience.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So
that person
there you go.
God works in mysterious ways.
Indeed, he does. Yeah. So today's episode could not be better timed. Although it will not be coming out for a few days, so he'll just have to sit back and relax and wait for a little bit. Yeah. So before I ask you guys how you are, I should let you guys and the audience know I am suffering from a terrible cold. So I'm probably not just to excuse why I'm sniffling and sneezing and sound like I have a pool up my nose, but also because I don't know how well my brain will function during these conversations. So
maybe about as good as mine normally does. So we'll be about.
I don't think I could rise to your level the way I am right now.
You did a very good job, I think, of trying to sound well during the intro. So maybe people will have been fooled in thinking you were in full health. You were enthusiastic and full of energy.
That was all I had, though. You know how you have like your energy tank, and then like if you play video games, it kind of goes to empty. That used up all my energy. So
just for the audience benefit, we record 2 episodes in one go, yes. So she'll still be ill next week as well.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 weeks in a row. Okay, so aside from me, how are you guys doing, gentlemen?
Good. I was telling you both beforehand that I'm currently filming in a bomb site, hence the very limited view behind me is the unacceptable bit of my house just here, and it's only barely acceptable.
I love it.
Clean, but
so it's a kitchen remodel, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Super exciting. I can't wait to see it when it's done.
Oh, it's exciting. It's just terrible in the meantime. Yeah.
I know we did our bathroom recently, and it was chaos, but we're super happy with it now.
How are you, Gilliver?
I'm okay. I'm off work next week, so I'm doubly okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I've got lots of stuff lined up though, like household chores and things like that for myself, and obviously busy with uni and things like that.
Paid work.
Yeah. So, but at least I don't have to get up at like 4:30 in the morning, which is always a bonus.
Yeah. Okay, so today's episode is pseudoscience, and I feel like we've kind of already touched on it in previous episodes here and there. On the science episode, on the research episode, we probably did on some of the other episodes too, like the vaccines and stuff like that. So where do you guys want to go in terms of pseudoscience this week?
I think starting with a sort of basic outline definition would be handy, just because not that we're like an educational show or anything, but I think we mean a very certain thing, don't we, when we're saying pseudoscience? Like the pseudo bit at the beginning means like
not quite,
not quite, or an imitation of science. Right. So it's all those sorts of things, isn't it, that sort of sound scientific or use bits of the scientific method or borrow bits from science and how that works in order to sort of, gain sort of legitimacy. I said sort of a lot in that sentence, and I apologize for that.
But that sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? Pseudoscience, like sort of, kind of, a little bit, but not. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. Gilliver, what's your understanding of pseudoscience? Like, what do you count as pseudoscience versus just regular science?
Yeah, pretty much the same as Gil. I think the thing is, it varies in kind of level pseudoscience from the outright crackpot to we touched on the episode a couple of weeks ago about the guy who thought that the Sphinx was a petrified living creature, and he was going through the on the video. He was going through the evidence of this. So it goes from the kind of real crackpot ideas like that to almost science. A lot of the stuff that we touched on in the vaccines episode covered kind of some pseudoscience areas where there's people who aren't quite sure about things. And so instead of like looking at proper research, they'll go and do something a little bit basic on YouTube or something along those lines, and then think they've got their answers, and they're going to pseudo-scientific sources. And then everything in between of that, I think a lot of kind of new age remedies and things fall into the category of pseudoscience. You know, drink this little drop of active ingredient distilled into the Pacific Ocean and you will be well.
Yeah, the first thing I think of when you say
forward that through to Laura, just like message her on Facebook with that recipe. I think
oh yeah, I'm all over the essential oils and the crystal healing today, guys. Don't worry, I got it. I'm good.
Even I think though fields like mine, I've talked recently a lot about linguistics, which is my specialism, but like linguistics technically means the science of language, but in lots of ways it's not science. And my degree is linguistics, but it was an arts degree, but it's called the science of language. And so lots of people describe linguistics as a pseudoscience. And it doesn't mean that linguistics as a field necessarily is dodgy or trying to gain legitimacy when it shouldn't have it. It just means that it's not fully actually science in the context that we mean in real.
I have the same thing. Sorry, Laura. I have exactly the same thing because religion, philosophy, and ethics are considered the arts and humanities, and not. If you listen to people like Richard Dawkins have outright said it's not real science. And you know, we're doing real history. History's a humanity. It's real work. It's doing real. It is separate from pseudoscience. You're doing real research, you're employing correct techniques, you're employing the scientific method in a lot of cases, and working with the scientific method in a lot of cases. It's not that you have proper sciences, the hard sciences, and then all the soft ones just like they're just pseudoscience. It's not quite like that, but some people, as Richard correctly says, do kind of perceive it in that way.
So it's sort of like a spectrum, like everything else in like human culture and society, where we have these definitions, but then nothing is ever really exactly black and white. And so I think the three of us actually form the triumvirate of pseudoscientific, scientific, but not scientific degrees. Because cultural anthropology is the same way. Like any form of anthropology, actually, there's a lot of debate out there whether anthropology even belongs in sciences at all, because of the nature of it. Like it's a lot of observation and a lot of collecting
and inference as well, I guess. Like
lots of that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, collecting inferences where it's like comparing this culture to that culture, or these artifacts to those artifacts, and kind of drawing conclusions. But you don't even know for sure if the artifacts that you're using for comparison are even correctly identified. So yeah, there's a lot of debate there about where the line is between hard sciences where you can draw actual conclusions, like chemistry, biology, a lot of that stuff, and then what Gilliver was calling like the softer sciences. And it's funny that all three of us chose fields that kind of fall into that gray area of, well, yeah, we're making observations, we're learning things, but is it hard science? Can we draw actual conclusions, or are we just sort of drawing a bunch of speculative inferences from what we're observing, right? All very, very subjective.
Yeah. I think a lot of the time, though, when people are talking about pseudosciences, they are talking about some of the things like you were saying, Gilliver, in terms of like alternative medicine or the sorts of things which can turn out to be actual in a lot of ways, really dangerous. I think one of the things I can't remember where or when I saw or heard this, but I heard a thing about the comparison between science and pseudoscience being that like people who are trying to promote these pseudoscientific avenues, like say an alternative medicine thing, that whatever else, that they're looking for evidence that proves their theories, whereas scientists often look for evidence that can disprove their theories. In
Right.
terms of like, because the peer review system and all of that in science is all about, well, actually we want to quash this, and if we can't quash it, it's probably somewhere near right, as opposed to that just boosting up for the sake of boosting up because we want our thing to be true, which doesn't follow that scientific method, and that might be one way of telling the difference.
Yeah, and I'm sort of curious because there is that sort of gray area where you're not sure if it's science or pseudoscience, or if the person is just gathering data to support their theory, or if it's a valid case. But what really gets me is when the science is like not there at all. So like things like crystal healing, or flat earth theory, or like the hollow earth theory. Some of these theories, like I get really confused how there can be any relevance to the data whatsoever. Like that is where, to me, pseudoscience is the most clear, where you can look at it and there's not as much of a question. It's no, that, I mean, I guess there would be for a layman who doesn't know.
But do you find a lot of that is through the use of like buzzwords? So people
Yeah,
talk about energies, or people will talk about dimensions, quantum theory. People pull out all these sorts of words that they know
yeah.
from actual science.
Or they'll bring in math. Like that seems to get
Yeah.
people convinced a lot.
And people
Yeah.
Yeah,
assume, I guess, that because they're using these words, and I have only an ever so slight, tiny understanding of anything to do with quantum theory. It's not my field at all. So, like, if I heard someone using the vocabulary and the speech of quantum theory, I might be tempted to think, oh, well, maybe there's something in that. Maybe they're saying something that does make sense, but I wouldn't necessarily know. And I think it's easy if you've got a bit of that vocabulary to chuck it out there, in order to come across as convincing as if you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think a lot of authors from, well, anywhere from kind of the 60s to, or maybe even earlier, but the 60s to through to the 80s, I think it was a really big thing. You've got people like, oh God, I'm going to crucify this name, Fridtjof Capra, who was a
I don't know how
legitimate.
to pronounce that name, but I think you did murder it just then.
It was a legitimate astrophysicist, or particle physicist, I think he was, and he wrote a book which got very famous called the Tao of Physics, which literally went through the early experiments of particle physics, and there were lots of diagrams. It looks like a very scientific book. And then he just compared it to like Hindu texts and other kind of religious texts and said, look, this corresponds to this and this corresponds to this. And it was really, that was kind of the archetypal kind of pseudo-scientific book. And then after him came people like Deepak Chopra, who's obviously the most famous one,
Yeah.
who wasn't quite as sciencey in his background, but
he does use a lot of
went,
science buzzwords.
Yeah, he went down the same route, and he's the kind of king of coming up with what's commonly now become known as deepisms, which is just, you even get like Deepak Chopra like word generators on the internet if you have a look for them.
I'm gonna go look for that.
You literally just input stuff. You like, it just like spins a wall and comes out with random deepisms that sound like they're all mystical and like sciencey at the same time, but it's really just nonsense.
Yeah, so that brings a question to my mind of okay, so when you have an actual scientist and stuff, but then they start to draw correlations between things that they're observing, or mathematical equations, and then say ancient texts. My question is, and where I think it falls pretty solidly in the realm of pseudoscience, is how do you separate the difference between causation and correlation, right? Like, so okay, and what I mean by that is, like, you have these Hindu texts and they sound really technical. It sounds like they're discussing atom bombs and they're discussing flying machines and floating cities and stuff like that, all very technical. And then you tie it in with like particle physics and stuff like that. How do you determine that that's not just a coincidence, right? Like, Actually, the question is in reverse. How do you rule out that that's not just a coincidence? Like, how did they come to the conclusion that that is as a valid correlation?
I don't know.
Because I think if it was, sorry, go on, Jova.
No, you'll go.
Okay, I was just going to say, if it was something that was investigated scientifically, surely it would be something that could be repeated, or would be repeatable, or would be falsifiable in some way. So if it was the sort of thing where, is it just correlation or what have you, is it just a coincidence? There should be another way of investigating that, and if there isn't, then that's possibly then an unfalsifiable claim, in which case, can you prove that scientifically, and should you be claiming that as a scientific fact?
Yeah, I guess that's like the point I'm making is exactly that. Like, oh, sure, you can draw these like sort of connections loosely, but when you start presenting them as, okay, here's like hard, solid facts, that's where it kind of loses me, and it goes
And actually, I
from,
don't think there's anything wrong with saying, here's some interesting stuff and here's something
sure,
that are linked with it. Like, there's value in that. But
yeah,
as long as you're not trying to pull that off as something that it's not.
yeah, make it gee whiz. Don't make it like a scientific explanation. Make it more like, hey, as a particle physicist, I'm interested in this, and it was really interesting to me how these sort of seemed to line up, right? Versus what Gilliver was saying, where it's like, nope, here is a book explaining how the connections are valid, and that's where it's like, okay, to me, that's where it goes from science to pseudoscience, regardless of your expertise.
Yeah, and I think there's a, like we said at the start, I think there's a spectrum on it, and if you take kind of the guy was talking about who wrote the Tao of Physics, who's got a professional scientific background, and kind of loosely correlates that with just vague kind of notions, whether they be religious or spiritual or otherwise, and makes those loose correlations. And then you can kind of go to the guys who are specifically religious, who might be, say, evangelical Christians or Muslims or something like that, and they're also scientists, and they kind of say, well, you know, I understand this field, let's say biology, and to me it looks designed.
Yeah.
So therefore, and they're talking about a specific thing. They're actually trying to prove a specific thing, whereas I think the guy who wrote the Tao of Physics kind of stumbled on it and saw a correlation in there. And I think there's a difference there. But also you can kind of, if you push that whole side of it aside, then you've got your Gwyneth Paltrow's.
Oh my gosh,
people like that who are like literally just coming up with bullshit. They are literally just coming up with crap to trying to sell something. And there was a thing with there was a band a few years ago, I don't remember the name of it, and a lot of athletes were wearing it, and it had been kind of the advertising was saying it really boosts your metabolism and gives you more energy, and all these famous people who were wearing it were coming out and saying, yeah, I'm wearing this, and it became a really big thing. It was like being I think it was maybe the NBA or the NFL or maybe both, where the players were actually wearing these and sponsoring this company, being sponsored by this company, and they did an investigation into it, and it just all fell apart. And they just said there's absolutely nothing in this whatsoever, and the company ended up, I don't know if I think it went bust, but somebody bought it out before it kind of like fizzled completely.
Things like that are interesting, I think, because, and here's an example, and I don't know if this is pseudoscientific or scientific, I actually don't know. I get travel sick when I go like on a plane or a long bus coach journey, whatever, and I can take travel sickness tablets and they work for me, and I understand they're medically approved and I can get them from the pharmacy. But like, you can also get things like magnet bands to wear on your wrist, and those are also sold in pharmacies as a travel sickness aid. I don't know how that would help. But then if I wore one and it did help, is that, there's that whole thing of like, is it the placebo effect?
Yeah.
But if it's a placebo effect, it is curing my travel sickness. So then it's, and there's also that gray area of like, I don't know if this is scientific or pseudoscientific. It would take a lot of research for me to go into that. But that's just one example, sort of linking to that in terms of like, I don't know if it actually works or just pretends to work, but either way it kind of works. So is it? I don't know.
I know that's a really good question, because there's been so many studies on placebos and how effective they are.
Yeah.
And if our bodies or our brains are that effective in creating sort of the outcome that we're hoping for or expecting, then you're right. At what point is it, oh, okay, it works at a chemical level, and then, oh, it works at a psychological level, right? But
Yeah.
either way, it works. So I'm kind of that mindset. Even so, this is where I'm probably going to lose you two, but even in terms of things like crystal healing or whatever, like not in terms of healing cancer or healing actual ailments, but if you're feeling like, oh, okay, wearing this crystal around my neck helps me reduce my stress, makes me feel calmer. Even if there's no science behind it, I would still tell that individual, like, hey, if that makes you feel better, if that brings you comfort, then flip and go for it. Like, I don't have any problem with it.
I
What
think we've
bothers me,
touched on a very important point, though.
yeah,
Sorry for jumping in, but
And
no,
a
it's
very
okay.
this
interesting
is
point.
really important. You
Yeah,
said if it makes them feel better or if it feels comfort, and that is distinctly different to them being better.
being better. Yeah. Well, and that's why I say things like if you're talking about an actual ailment where there's an actual physiological, chemical, or physical, like a broken bone or cancer or something, if there's actually something wrong with you, then I would definitely tell someone to be careful about things like using essential oils to heal cancer or crystal heal. Like those are the two that I can think of off the top of my head. I know there's tons more. There's the stuff where they dilute the medicine to the point where it's really not there. They're just sugar pills.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what that's called. Homeopathy. Yeah.
Homeopathy.
Yeah. Homeopathy. So there's that kind of stuff where I think it's very, very dangerous because people aren't
Yeah.
curing problems that need to be looked into. But then there's sort of that gray area where it's like, you pet a dog and it makes you feel better, right? So then you wear out, like you rub a crystal and it makes you feel better. And you're right. It's like there's this psychological placebo mind thing where it actually is working. Like there is a change in chemicals in your brain. It's just self-induced.
This is
Yeah, I
really
think
interesting. Like all of that has just sparked off a lot of thoughts in my head. Let me try and process them. So, like, it's like people say with the religions, and I know we're not really talking about religions as such today, but like people say, oh well, if Christianity brings me hope and stuff in the future, what harm is there in
Yeah.
believing in that? If it's just going to give me hope that I'll see my relatives later in life after death or things like that. That's one
Right.
thought, and we can jump on that if you want to. Another thought was like, you say, oh well, if I wear that crystal or rub that crystal, it gives me like a good feeling or whatever. And it's a similar sort of idea to like, oh, I'll wear my lucky socks to that job interview or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the look exists, but it still might have a positive impact. But then there's that line, isn't there, between things that are nice and feel nice and the point at which it becomes either dangerous or sort of negative in the way it impacts stuff. You were
Yeah.
talking, Laura, about like I guess like alternative medicines and stuff like that. My big thing about alternative medicines and herbal medicines and all of that is that if they were as effective as people claim, we would
They
just
be
call
marketed.
it medicine now.
Yeah.
Yeah, like all the things that have been in the past found to be medicinal and effective and proven to be so are
Are
just
still
part of
being
the
used. Yeah.
yeah, and we use
but there
them.
are there are some of those kind of medicines which are
Yeah.
borderline,
Yeah.
and I'm totally against, and I'm going to, I don't want to offend one of my friends here, but I'm going to slightly touch on one of my friends who's an acupuncturist.
Do it, Richard.
But he knows how I feel. A few years ago, I've problems with my hands. I've had several operations on my hands. This one I still can't make. That's as far as that goes into a fist. I need another operation on that, and I've had like 3 on this one, 2 on this one. And
Is it from pro wrestling?
no, actually, I don't know what caused it I've been through this with the consultants who I spoke to, but we don't need to go into. But they've basically just said, it's just one of those things that some people are probably more prone to than others. Some people might never get it. Some people, like you, guys, get it. Because I blew my hands up when I was younger, so I thought that might have been something to do with it as well, but apparently not. But anyway, this acupuncture friend of mine, really good friend of mine. And he came along and he says, let me try some acupuncture. And he knows it's not my thing. I don't think it's got any kind of healing power or anything. I said, come, for sake of trying, come and try. And he came and he stuck his needles and I literally felt absolutely no change whatsoever than I had before I had it. None whatsoever. But that's available on the NHS in the
I was
UK.
just going to say that you can be prescribed acupuncture by a doctor.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's obvious. I'm not saying obviously because I don't know, but you would think that if they're going to the lengths of prescribing it on the NHS, that it has some sort of property, even if it's just a placebo effect,
Yeah.
that it
Right.
has some sort of property which does help people.
Well, and then how do you study something like that? Like when you talk about like acupuncture or prayer or meditation or healing crystals, and it's self-reported, and you have these people who would potentially be a part of the study who genuinely believe in whatever these properties are. How do you eke out the self-reported
I guess it depends what it is
benefits
you're trying to
from?
treat. Because if you're treating
Yeah.
mood or comfort or pain, all of those are heavily psychological.
Oh
If
yeah.
it is something like treating cancer, you can measure things like that more accurately, can't you?
Yeah, and that's why
Yeah.
I think that there's less oh, I don't even want to say that because I think there's a lot of bullshit out there for people saying that they treat cancer too. But I think a lot of the alternative medicine, I think that's why it is geared toward things that you can't really necessarily measure. Like pain management, it seems like, oh, that should be really easy. Either you feel the pain or you don't. But it is self-reported and it is very subjective. And you can psych yourself into feeling better using different techniques, right?
Yeah.
Um, like whether it's just meditation or whatever. Um,
You can do that purely psychologically without a
for
single
sure.
extra bodily thing, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you talk about like, does acupuncture work to relieve pain or does like say certain oils work to relieve pain or whatever? Um, that is where I think it's the hardest, in my opinion, to sort out the pseudoscience from the science because it's so subjective. And if you have a
Yeah.
large body of people who really believe that this could potentially have a benefit, then you're going to get a large result back that says, "Oh yeah, this actually has a benefit." Right? So I guess I'm just confused, like how you
And I
would
don't
eke
know how
out.
you would remove the bias from that.
Right. That's exactly my question is how to do that.
No, and when you look at, and I'm going to stick with acupuncture, not to pick on my
Yeah.
friend, but just simply because it's what we are talking
Yeah.
about. But when you look at, when you say how do you study that, and I think you mentioned prayer as well. Well, prayer has been studied and it's
Oh, it
been
has been.
found not
Yeah.
to work,
Yeah.
and we spoke about that previously. But acupuncture, it's what are you studying? Because are you studying how someone's reacting? Or are you actually studying what the claims are? Because if you look at what they're claiming, they claim the body is made up of air, wind, earth, and fire elements, and it's balancing these elements. They're clearly not studying that and passing that medically.
Well, that goes into
Be,
like chi and stuff like that too, and all the
yeah.
chakras and stuff.
Well,
Like,
that's what acupuncture is. It's but
right.
you're affecting the flow of chi through the body.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Like
exactly what you're doing.
untangling areas where it's gotten caught up or something. I mean, I don't know very much about it. So if I'm making a fool of
No.
myself with my explanation, then yay me. But yeah, it's to me, that's the same thing as measuring whether or not we have a soul, like whether or not we have chi. We can measure electromagnetic energy through our body. We can measure blood flow. We can measure heart rate. We can measure so much
Brain
metabolism.
scans,
Or,
things are
yeah,
going on. And yeah.
right. And so to have this mysterious thing that there's just no way to measure, and yet it's so widely accepted and it's so widely, like, I would even say that there are quote unquote studies that support that these things work. And that goes back to what we were saying, the whole like, yeah, but it's all subjective. And how do you verify that? How do you challenge that study or falsify it? Yeah, it's difficult for me.
I've not actually looked into any studies. I've seen that studies have been done, but I've not looked into any of them at all. So I really can't speak on that side of it. I find it very interesting, and I'd love to know how they are done. Whether it is just they're looking at the effects of the acupuncture. That to me, they simply cannot be going in and looking at the whole kind of science behind what's claimed about the bodies and the balancing of the bodies and the chi flow and things like that. They can't be doing that and then clearing it. If there are, there's some criminal negligence going off.
Oh, for
as
sure.
far as I'm concerned.
So maybe
But,
that's something. Go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of things in that area can just be backed up by like a few really powerful anecdotes, like really powerfully sounding anecdotes. my friend had these fingers that didn't go past there, and we did this acupuncture, and actually he's been able to play the piano, and he's been able to do this and that, and like all you need is a few of those, and actually it can come across as incredibly convincing. And actually things like that, I think, for convincing people, not that I'm saying people who are acupuncturists or whatever are trying to hoodwink people, I'm not saying that at all, but like those sorts of anecdotes are much more powerful in terms of persuading people of the legitimacy of something than data in a lot of ways. My friend did this, it benefited him or her in this way, her life was changed, his life was changed. That's really strong evidence in people's minds in a real everyday sort of way.
Especially when you say the word friend.
Talking about evidence in people's minds, we've got to go to a commercial break, but when we come back, we'll want to stay on the things working in your mind. Is it pseudoscience? Is it not? But talk about pharmaceutical drugs.
Ooh, I like it.
So we'll come back to that after a quick commercial break.
All right, guys.
So, what are we doing this week? Well, I'm doing nothing. Richard, have you been inundated with invitations to come and speak this week?
No, I'm just doing my kitchen this week. But
well, we did do an appeal for you last week. Help our friend, help our needy friend. I'm sure we'll get someone to get you on something one day. Might have to dress up.
There you go. Bring that blow-up bunny from the Easter thing back.
Laura, of course, is killing us all again with her popularity. So I'm looking at my look at
it's not popularity, it's tenacity. Have you ever heard the term squeaky wheel gets the grease?
I haven't, but I like it.
I have, and it's Laura. On the 15th, which is it's yesterday.
See, this is what happens when we record in advance. Like,
I'm trying to think backwards.
Like
yesterday.
Time travel.
Yes. So I will have just appeared on the perspective. So go back and rewatch it.
Yeah, because it's from this vantage point in the future, it's absolutely brilliant.
It is. It was good. I enjoyed doing it. I already know.
And on the 20th, which is in the actual future, in the real future, she's going to be on The Non-Profits, which is a brilliant show, and you're on with Jenna, and I don't remember who else you're on with. The Perspective, you're on with David Warnock, who's absolutely brilliant. If you've not seen any of David's stuff, he's an amazing guy. He did a thing called Dying Out Loud. He's got ALS. It's a terminal illness.
I'm really looking forward to working with him.
He speaks on this. Is such a good guy. Please go and look up David Warnock, and we'll put some stuff on the Facebook group for him.
He's one of those humans that's just like so full of love. It's just amazing.
Yeah. So before we get to the Facebook group, Richard's usual Facebook group section, I put someone put a post on Facebook the other day. I don't remember which area we was in, but somebody had asked for recommendations for podcasts, and somebody actually recommended us.
And it wasn't one of us,
guys. It wasn't one of us. It wasn't one of our friends, and it wasn't, as far as I know, someone who's actually in the discussion group. I'm going to give him a shout out though for being so brilliant. The guy's name is Avia Ernesto Narvaez Abad from Panama.
I don't think we should have Richard Gilliver do the names anymore. I think we need to pass it. I think we need to pass it on to somebody
else. I apologize for crucifying your name.
Sorry.
But on the plus side, you've also got a shout out. My Spanish, as we know from my old wrestling story, is not the best. But talking about Facebook, Richard, take it away.
Right, normally I come up with some fancily worded thing, but I'm just going to go simple today. The Facebook group is great, and you should join it. You can find the link to that on linktr.ee/Skeptic Hangout, where you can also find our show on all platforms, for example, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, and any other sort of podcatchers and stuff. Go on there, talk to us. We are friendly. We say hello. And that's it.
That's it. So
That's it.
Awesome.
That's a commercial break.
On that
Back
note,
to the
back
show.
to the show.
Okay, so before the
right.
commercial break, I wanted to talk about pharmaceutical drugs and the way they make you feel, because when you're feeling ill, when you've just got a mild cold, you can take your very mild over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, which actually take off the symptoms. They don't make you get better any quicker, but they take the
relieve the
symptoms
symptoms.
off.
Yeah.
So what are we saying about those in this conversation we're having about pseudoscience? Because they seem to fall. We know they work. We know they're medically tested. We know they're scientific. But they could very easily fall into the category of some of the stuff we've been talking about, which is genuine pseudoscience. It doesn't have an actual effect on the illness. It makes you feel better. So what are we talking about when we look at those?
I was going to bring that up when you were talking about acupuncture. It was kind of on my mind too. So I'm glad that you brought it up. But I remember reading somewhere, and I don't even know. So this is a study that was referenced in a podcast. Don't know if the podcast was accurate or not. Don't know if the study was right or not. But it did get me thinking. They were talking about how even the effectiveness of painkillers is somewhere in I think they said something like 20 or 40% effective or something like that. In other words, even the pharmaceutical studies show that things like painkillers or cold and flu relief tablets or pills or whatever are only so effective, right? Which is kind of to say, in my opinion, not effective. So I'm right there with you, Gilliver, in terms of, so I have a cold right now. I feel like absolute poo, right? So I woke up, I felt like crap. I took some pain or cold medicine, won't give the name of the company away, and I still feel like crap, right? I feel like a little bit of relief, a little bit of painkiller, a little bit more, I can breathe a little bit easier. But how much of that is me just getting up and moving around, drinking hot tea, getting the fluids, rinsing out whatever's in there? And how much of it is, no kidding, because of the medicine I took? Certainly it didn't make me feel right as rain, right? So that's a really good question. That
plus placebo effect as well, like we said, you've taken some medication for this.
Yeah.
It's so we have a cupboard full of paracetamol and ibuprofen and stuff for when we've got a headache or a cold or whatever else. And yeah, you do. It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Do we the medications themselves are scientifically proven, like you were saying, Gilliver, and are proper,
tested.
they're real and tested. But do we almost use them in pseudoscientific ways in terms of and by that I mean paracetamol, for example, as a drug? One of the effects of it is that it can help a fever. So that's one of the things that it lists as its effects. So children have low doses of paracetamol if they've got a fever, if they've got a viral infection or what have you. Every British person overdoses children on Calpol on a regular basis. But that's one of the effects that's proven, but and it's got mild pain relief symptoms. But actually, doctors give people paracetamol for so much stuff. It's how much of that is just, I'm getting a drug from a doctor, and so that's going to make me better, and so I'm feeling better. But again, I think we've said this before, even if it is that, and it is psychological or it is whatever else, it's still having that positive effect. But yeah, you can't measure it, and you can't put that through scientific proofs for all those other uses, just the ones that it was actually kind of, I guess, designed for and
studied for, tested for.
Studied for. Yeah.
Well, and then so that brings up the question, reading the actual studies. How many of us actually go out and read the actual studies of these different pharmaceutical drugs and what percentages they actually work, or what type of okay, so one, for example, might be okay, let's say arthritic pain relief, or arthritic swelling or something like that. And they study it and they say, oh, okay, well, this medicine X made X percent of our test subjects feel X percent better, right? Oh, okay, well, there was some relief with this one, no relief with this one, and then more relief with this one, but it's all reported subjectively.
95% of women preferred our shampoo to this.
Right. So that's my question is, so if it says something okay, so there was 100 people in the study, 70 people reported that there was a 50% decrease in pain. There was still pain there, and not all of them reported that there was. So that does beg the question of, yes, is it actually chemically doing what it says that it's supposed to be doing, or are you just perceiving that there is a relief from whatever the symptom is? And so I think that in terms of a lot of medications, I think they fall under the same gray area to me, that not quite as skeptical as things like crystal healing, just because I think the studies are a little tighter. But they do fall into a gray area for me. I don't have a huge amount of confidence that all of the drugs that we're taking are really as beneficial as we psychologically think that they are.
We talked a lot about that aspect of things in the vaccines episode quite early on, didn't we? A
Yeah.
good few months ago now.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that comes down to, because there's a big vocal minority of anti-vaxxers and stuff, and we've all spoken before about how we've all been fully or partially vaccinated at whatever point.
Mhm.
But like, you can kind of understand why people not would be skeptical, because I'm not promoting anti-vaxxers, but like, I think it's reasonable to be like, I haven't seen all the studies for this, and I
Right.
don't know enough information about it. They're telling me this information, but I don't necessarily have a way of knowing what's true about that or not. People talk
Mhm.
about the efficacy rate of vaccines and the COVID vaccines and the different brands of that, and what does that all mean? And so and so says the Pfizer one's better, so and so says the AstraZeneca Oxford one's
Right.
better. And we just we are all laymen apart from the people who make vaccines, or who are medical professionals. And yeah, I'm not trying to defend anti-vaxxers, because I think it's irresponsible to not
To
get
get not
vaccinated if
vaccinated.
you are
Yeah.
able to be. And I understand there are also people who medically can't get vaccinated. Um, but
Well, and
it does kind of make, I get it, kind of.
yeah, and like how much of that comes down to advertising versus, okay, so there's like the scientific community and the studies being done, and then there's the companies and the advertising being done. So how much of it is not even the responsibility of the researchers? Like what you
Mm.
said with the vaccines, if we would have really strong advertising that's accurate, that says, okay, it works 70% of the time, it has these side effects, da 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 da, and like really truly educating people, but then also telling them, but by taking it, you're reducing the amount of people getting COVID by millions, right? And we need to get those reductions to start happening somehow. And if y'all aren't going to stay home and quarantine, then here's another option. And I mean, I
And plus,
think,
how often do you hear a horror story of, oh, I was out of action for a week after my vaccine, or
right.
I felt like death, and or I had COVID and then I had the vaccine and the vaccine was worse. And those stories stick in your mind, and it's just really legitimate reason. I think in the science episode, we talked about science communication and the effectiveness of science communication.
Yeah.
And it's exactly that, like you were saying, Laura. Um, it's like, from my perspective, I don't know whether the vaccine, I've only had my first dose, I've got my second dose booked in. I don't know this second if the vaccine has benefited me in any way, or
Right.
anyone else in any way. I have no way of knowing that. I may I may have uh, I may have avoided an infection over the last couple of weeks because of the vaccine that I had, but I may not have got COVID anyway, or I may have
Right.
COVID now but be asymptomatic because of the vaccine. And I've no way of knowing that, have I?
Yeah. So how do you verify that? How do you verify the effectiveness? I know that nationwide, and this is sort of a guess, but using a little bit of critical thinking, they look for overall trends and numbers. And like, so when they see, okay, we've put X number of shots on the market in X areas, and the cases, or the number of new cases has reduced by X amount, they can sort of measure trends. But
Yeah.
you're right. Like as an individual walking around, how do you know, as like an everyday Joe, that what you just put in your body is actually stopping or preventing something that you otherwise would have gotten without it,
Yeah.
right? And
And I
like
know
The
from,
we're
thing is,
moving slightly sideways from pseudoscience a little bit, but I think it does link in with all of that. And I think humans are really bad at thinking big picture, aren't we? And you talk nearly every week, Jill, about how shit human brains are. But like, it's a big personal decision that you make for yourself, but actually, it's a decision that you're making as part of a species,
Mhm.
and that's a really difficult thing to sort of weigh up and judge, isn't it?
yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up, especially in relation to pseudoscience. And I don't want to go down this route too far, because we have touched on this on at least a couple of previous episodes. But where you're perfectly valid and I want to say this because I know you were using kind of, I don't want to defend the anti-vaxxers, and I'm trying to address that point particularly.
Yeah,
it's absolutely valid to question something. There is nothing at all wrong with it.
Right.
The point you turn from that, and I'm going to come back to anti-vaxxers specifically, but in general, when we're talking about conspiracy theories, the point you go from that to conspiracy theorist is when you are presented with the research and then you continue to ignore it and take that extra step. And that's where you kind of go like conspiracy theories. But talking about anti-vaxxers specifically, you know, it is difficult because there are people who are anti-vaxxers because they claim to have done the research and are ignoring it, who are conspiracy theories. And then there are your average Joe anti-vaxxers who have just heard from Mabel down the road that it doesn't work, and I'm a bit skeptical about that, and I'm not sure about that one. And they are as harmful in some ways as the conspiracy theory nuts when it comes to herd immunity.
I think in some cases they're worse.
Yeah,
because
maybe.
like the hardcore conspiracy theorists are few and far between in any conspiracy. Like, but then you have like the everyday person that's like, well, I mean, it's kind of possible, or well, I just don't trust the media, or well, the government really is untrustworthy or corrupt, you know. And those people are the ones talking to their friends and neighbors and actually getting traction. When you get a conspiracy theorist who's gone way out on the deep end, like there's 5G in the vaccine, and like they're putting trackers on us. Those people are going to get listened to by a far, far, far smaller number of other people than the everyday Joe that you're talking about, who are just like, you know, pharmaceutical companies, it's all about the money, and I just don't trust it. I don't feel right about it, you know. So I honestly think that it's more dangerous overall. I don't know. And I'm just throwing that out there. I don't have any study or data.
Richard, your point of view on that?
Did I have a point of view? Oh, I was going to jump back to something you said just a little bit ago, in terms of like, you know, the point at which someone turns from that just being skeptical or interested or looking into it to then a conspiracy theorist is when they're presented with the evidence, but they just carry on anyway. And that does link back to what I was saying earlier on. And I'll try and find the source of where I heard this from. But you know, the thing about evidence that they just want evidence that supports and don't go for any evidence against. They're not trying to falsify to actually find the truth. And that linked back to that really nicely.
Yeah, so that touched on to you. No, I mean, a lot of these episodes, especially this, and we've recently done a science episode and we've recently done a research episode, and they are very closely linked together. And we talked in the research episode about how some people who have a conclusion and work backwards looking to reinforce that conclusion and dismissing stuff. And that's pretty much what you're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess that's where, if we're trying to draw a line, and I know that there's not necessarily a line to be drawn, like we're talking, it's all spectrums, it's all shades of gray. But if we're kind of trying to generally draw a line, I think that there's two of them that you guys have kind of identified, in my opinion. One of them is when you're taking on certain data to support your conclusion and then rejecting other data rather than taking in all of it and saying, okay, now what conclusions can we draw? So that's the one. And then the other one is what you guys were talking about of sort of doing the bad science, right? Like where you genuinely are looking to see if there's a correlation or causation, but you just can't, like acupuncture, for example. Oh, well, they're reporting that it works, so it works, right? So I'm not talking about necessarily that that's on the scientific end. I think that's more on the layman's end, if you ask me.
And that sort of science that just lacks the rigor of the proper method.
Where there's like no study whatsoever almost. Yeah. Or the study is very anecdotal, like what you were saying earlier, Gil.
Yeah.
A shampoo advert study where they said we questioned 78 women and like 50% of the 78 said they were really in favor of this shampoo.
And oh, by the way, we gave them all a free bottle of shampoo. Yeah.
don't dress that up as a study. That's not a study.
Right.
Always read the small print. One thing that I think is interesting aspect of sort of pseudoscience, and moving away from sort of medical stuff that we focus on quite a lot, and I think reasonably so, but into sort of a religious aspect of things, is to do with intelligent design, which I think is a really interesting field.
Ooh,
Because
yeah.
intelligent design is one of those areas where when and this is my understanding, and please correct me, you will correct me when I do say something false, but
Absolutely.
but like people were spouting reasonably evolution and Big Bang cosmology as the sort of way to explain lots about the world and how we're and all of that stuff. And just saying God did it wasn't enough. So people packaged it in this sort of intelligent design theory to make it sound like a serious alternative theory to the theory of Big Bang cosmology and evolution and stuff.
So that
Sorry, go on, Laura.
no, you weren't finished. I thought you were finished.
Oh, I was just going to say, because it has those things about what's the term? Sorry, yeah, I stopped you from interrupting me, and then I forgot the term that I was wanting to say. Is it irreducible complexity?
It is
About things that,
irreducible
like,
complexity.
things in the past that were simple cannot have evolved to become loads more complex and things. And it's got these things, like I said before, that sound really sophisticated and scientific. But again, they've ignored all of the evidence for Big Bang cosmology and all of the evidence for all these other areas that would go against intelligent design as a theory. Laura.
So I think and this is really exciting to me, I think you hit a third point. Like, I almost want to make a list that we can put on the Facebook page of like things that you could use to identify whether it's a science or a pseudoscience, right? And that is when you add additional leaps, right? When you're adding additional conclusions or additional leaps into whatever it is. So let's say you have some skepticism towards Big Bang cosmology, or you have these like, I don't understand it, or I don't agree with it. Rather than trying to formulate and test a different theory, you do a therefore this, right? And that's not just done in religion, that's done in a lot of different pseudosciences, right?
Yeah.
So let's say like ghosts and supernatural stuff. It's, well, we had this event, this occurred, we don't really know what it was, we're testing it, we're looking into it, we're using our little EMF measurers, we're taking pictures, we're doing all our scientific research to try to confirm that they're ghosts. Oh my god, something weird happened, we caught it on tape, therefore ghosts, right? And
Yeah.
so that's, and like what you're saying, well, we have irreducible complexity, and we have this like beautifully balanced universe that I would argue is basically out to kill us, but whatever. And
Aggressively so.
right, aggressively out to kill us. We have this tiny little bubble in the universe where we can barely survive, but it's God's
A bubble
beautiful,
that we happen to be poking holes in just like all the time.
all the time, with an environment that we are working very desperately to destroy, right? But anyway, so we have this environment in which we can survive, and it's just so perfectly suited to us, therefore God, right? And so that I think is another measure of pseudoscience versus regular science, is adding that additional conclusion without the additional evidence to support it.
And obviously there is evidence, however tenuous or bad it is, you can find evidence for intelligent design. You can find things that support the theory of intelligent design. You can talk about irreducible complexity, and I know there are other aspects to it, but those are fancy sounding words, so it makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about. #pseudoscience. But like, but there are things like that where you can legitimately say this is evidence that makes sense for this sort of conclusion, and it's not that there isn't evidence there, but it is just that the rigor with which that has been investigated.
Well, I was gonna say, aren't you still jumping to conclusions though? Like, if we were to say, okay, we've only seen so small for an atom or whatever, or I know it gets way smaller than atoms, but I'm not even gonna try with my cold brain to try and rip out any sort of technical words at this point. But so we find like the smallest little bitty particle that we can, and okay, we've decided we can't reduce it further than that. Or like the argument for the eye of irreducible complexity is that it has to have a certain amount of complexity to function as an eye. A lot of that is misunderstanding science, because there are simple eyes, but in addition to that, you're still making a leap. Like, so you say, okay, there's a point where an eye can't be reduced any further and still be an eye, therefore God, right? So you're still, even though you're saying, okay, there might be some evidence to support it, one, I think in some cases we would argue that that evidence isn't actually evidence, it's misunderstanding the evidence. And then two is you're still making a leap for what is reasonable evidence to the conclusion without really having all that stuff in between to really tie it together or back it up.
And the problem with this as well is you've got people who, I've got a friend who's a creationist, you know, and he's a really nice guy. He just believes bad shit. And that's one kind of aspect of creationists. And for the majority, that's the most part of creationists, are just genuine, normal, nice people who believe bad stuff.
Yeah, they're just not scientists.
But when it comes to pseudoscience in particular, you have people who create their own institutes.
Yeah.
Their own creation institutes. They want to get rid of peer review.
Their own curriculums.
They want to put their own curriculums in. They want to, and it's a whole thing. And in the US, not so much here, but over in your neck of the woods, it's like it's a real threat.
Yeah.
Getting the Texas school board has had, I don't know how many times it's had kind of been got in court to try and get creationism taught as a viable theory in school. And it's bullshit. And it shouldn't be there. And it shouldn't even be considered to be there. And you've got that, and you've got people who are, like I said, doing these alternative institutes. And it's, I don't want to talk too much about this because we are having an episode about creationism and we've got an awesome guest for you. But I'm not telling you who it is.
Yes, it's going to be fun. But right, we don't even have to touch on creation though, because there's institutes for other types of alternative healing. There's schools and areas of study where there's textbooks and lessons and tests and stuff to get certified. So it's not just creationism or religion that's doing this whole pseudoscience thing and like creating their own institutions. I think it covers the whole gambit of just about any type of pseudoscientific theory out there, you know. So that's just one thing to point out is we tend to do, and not just us as in the three of us, but we as in like our societies and cultures tend to do the religion versus science thing quite a bit.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Yeah. And I think in this case, we could literally leave religion out of this entire episode and still have plenty to talk about in terms of pseudoscience and these institutions popping up.
Because I think there is. Do you think? I was just going to say, do you think there is a difference between the sorts of people who are sort of trying to spread and share those ideas just because they believe in them and they may be misguided in how they've come to their conclusions, and the people who are like specifically trying to convince people like in order to make money or to
definitely
in other ways.
100%. Yeah. 99%, so I don't believe anything. 100% skepticism. But talking about skepticism, Laura was talking about literally the skepticist method, if you like, if there is such a thing. Earlier on, when she was talking about, like, you know, we don't like we have a base level of what we can accept as reasonable. And then for a lot of these things, we have to start piling stuff on top of it. And we're creating pile after pile after pile. And that's what this pseudoscience essentially is. It's taking something at a base level, no matter what field it's in, whether it's religion or science or whatever, you can apply it to pretty much any area. And then you just start adding stuff on and saying, you know, well, yeah, but that works. And we know that works. So this layer on top, it's not a great leap to say that this works. It makes me feel better. So why can't it be legitimate? And then you add another layer on top.
As an example, like in intelligent design or creationism and all that sort of stuff.
A man's obsessed.
Obsessed. I just mean, like, you know, in lots of scientific sort of theories, it's like, this is my strong, bold evidence. There's other things, but this is the big evidence. Whereas lots of other things like that, like you were saying, are built up of, well, the eye can't have been like this, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And none of them, like you were saying, Laura, none of them on their own point to a god, but actually all of them together don't either. But there's loads of them. So you were saying, Joe, it seems like it's legitimate, doesn't it?
There's a fallacy for that. What is that called? Where you have like a lot
I
of
can't
little
remember. I
points?
was just trying to think of the name
Yeah,
for
I'll
it
have to
myself.
post it in the Facebook page because I can't remember right now, but there is a fallacy for when you present just a whole bunch of little data that doesn't necessarily lead to your conclusion, but because there's so much, or it seems like there's so much out there, it leads people to have more trust or more faith in that conclusion.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. It's really bugging me because as soon as you said that, I had the same thing going through my head.
Yeah. So before we get too late in the episode, I did have one question that I thought would be really interesting for us to
composition fallacy.
Oh, is that what it is? No, the composition fallacy is like
is that something else? We're really showing his ignorance.
Yeah, no, the composition fallacy is the whole is the same as the parts, right? So you have a building made of bricks, right? And so it's a little bit different. But one thing I wanted to discuss.
I interrupted you, Tareen.
No,
so go on.
You're testing my knowledge on fantasies right now, or fallacies. Ugh. Laura needs more cold medicine.
The fallacy fantasy.
Fallacy fantasies.
Or the fantasy fallacy. We'll have to make one up for that.
I like it. Yeah, because it would be a fantasy.
Put a red light on. I've got some red light filters, actually.
I like it. Okay, but getting back to pseudoscience before we go totally off the rails. I wanted to discuss what we think of as, and we've sort of touched on them, but to really get like on point with them, what are some of the potential dangers or the ways in which pseudoscience is used in bad ways or harmful ways, besides creationism teaching kids not to be critical thinkers? But like what, I mean, we could even use that one as an example, but what do you guys think about that?
Richard.
Oh, I knew you were going to say me.
You're that kid in class that gets picked on when you're like, don't pick on me, don't pick on me.
No, I didn't put my hand up. Yeah, I think a lot of the things that we've talked about, like alternative medicines and stuff, we've talked a lot about like pain management, for example, which doesn't necessarily I mean, pain is horrible, and especially people who have like chronic pain conditions and stuff like that. That is a life-altering sort of condition to live with. But I think to the point where if you go down that rabbit hole far enough to the point where you are going to be trusting some herbal medicine for this or that, when it's actually a serious medical issue, or you're to the point where you believe in these theories so much that you don't therefore then trust medical professionals for their expertise in this area or that, that not only threatens your own life potentially, but if you're actively passing that on to other people, you're endangering other people's lives. I think that's certainly a really dangerous avenue in pseudoscience terms.
Yeah. And no, go ahead.
I think, did you have something to say on that? Because I was going to give a different example. So if you had something to say on Gil.
I did, yeah. So the thing that I had to say on that is what makes that the most dangerous, in my opinion, is the good intentions, right? Like I have the best of intentions in healing my child, and I happen to believe in X or Y alternative healing method. And it's not even the corruption or the people who are trying to make money off of it that makes it the most damaging, and with what you were saying, Gil, but more like the fact that it really is just everyday people with the best of intentions not realizing that whatever it is that they're doing isn't doing a damn thing to help whatever the problem is.
And I hadn't even thought about like children, like you were saying, the children of these people who are having to either suffer with conditions or whose lives are in danger because of, those alternative ways of treating them that are not proven and are not, fully rigorously tested. I think, really, really dangerous.
Yeah. Well, I have an example of that actually off the top of my head. Well, two examples, but they come to the same conclusion. Is one was using lavender oil for a baby rash, and the other was using horse oil for a baby rash. And
Where'd you get the oil from a horse?
I don't even know what that means. When I said horse oil, I think it's something they put on horses. It's a product used for horses. I don't know. That one threw me for a little bit of a loop because I'd never heard that one before.
I know Richard
heard...
as a horse. So
yeah.
Oh yeah. So do you know what horse oil is? Because I sure don't. If you want to tell
I'll
me,
check and I'll put it on the Facebook group.
Perfect.
I was hoping he wasn't going to go milk it to try.
Actually extract the oil from the horse.
No, yeah. No, but the thing is, like, okay, so diaper rashes need to be dried out. They need to be, like soothed, and oils tend to lock stuff in and lock moisture in. So in both cases, the parents were complaining that their baby's diaper rashes weren't going away. And this is not a product plug, but I recommended a thing called butt paste, which is actually medically tested, proven to take care of diaper rash. The studies have been done. And in both cases, it was like, oh my God, the diaper rash went away so quickly. And so that's an example of the best of intentions. That's what they were told would work. In one person's case, it was like that was their family remedy going back for however long. Like that was just, we swear by it. You got to try it. It's, that's what we've always done. And yet her rash was getting worse and worse and worse. And as soon as they used butt paste, it got better. And so I don't know. That's just, it came straight to my mind when we talk about the good intentions with the harm that it can cause people or little babies' bottoms.
Yeah. So I think, and we're getting close to the end now, so I'll incorporate this into my closing statement as well. I think the most, possibly even more dangerous than what Richard touched upon, which I agree with, but possibly even more dangerous, but a lot more subtle, and something we've not touched at all upon in this episode, apart from very briefly, is a pseudoscience in advertising.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's purposefully used to go out and manipulate people. That is its intention. And it's a huge thing. And it's widespread wherever you look. I mean, even Laura, just then in the story you were telling, you touched upon like how just someone telling their friend about their family recipe. That's a form of pseudoscience in advertising. Yeah. It's not a commercial advert, but it's you're saying, well, try this, and but that's been taken and run with by these huge corporations whose job it is to sell us bullshit.
Oh, and the reach that they have.
Yeah. Global.
Yeah.
Or flat, depending on what your opinion is.
Around, on top of, throughout the world, whatever. I'm not going to be politically correct when it comes to flat Earth.
So I think that for me is a massive thing, and if we follow this episode up, we'll maybe start with that one because it's something we didn't touch upon at all. We tend to do this. We tend to have episodes like this where I certainly personally didn't know what we were going to talk about, and you get halfway through and you're running with so much stuff and there's so many avenues to go down.
Oh, absolutely. We could do a 2 to 3 hour podcast and still not cover it all. But what that means is like job security, right? Because we'll go through all the topics we can think of and then we got to go back through them all over again. So I like it. But I think you touched on something that I think we should add to our list of episodes, and that's advertising. I don't think that's on our list, but approaching just the whole conversation of advertising from a skeptical perspective and what we think about that, I think would be good. But an episode for another time. So, gentlemen, it was fun. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, thank you guys all for watching. We will catch you next time. But in the meantime, we are Laura,
Richard,
and Richard. And this has been Skeptic Hangout. Until next time,
keep questioning.
Interrogate your beliefs.
Stay skeptical.
Bye.
Bye.